YouTube fam, what's going on? It's your boy JR. It's the Unleavened Truth. Back with another video. We are wrapping up our first pillar of our reset series, which is who are God's chosen people. If you didn't catch part one or part two, I highly recommend you go back and watch those. I went through a lot of context. But just to give you a quick recap, part one, we dissected the difference between a Hebrew, an Israelite, and a Jew. In part two, we established that the people living in the land today, the people who call themselves Jews, are actually not a Semitic people at all. They have no bloodline connection to the tribes of Israel or the tribe of Judah specifically. And at the end of part two, I mentioned that the lost tribes can be identified just by reading Deuteronomy 28. And I'm going to prove pretty conclusively here with history, scripture, science, little common sense, that the people that we're labeling in the world as black people are in fact the bloodline descendants of the house of Israel. Now, before we jump in to Deuteronomy 28, I do want to be very clear about something, okay? There's a movement out there I wasn't really aware of or really hip to. You've probably seen them on the street corners. You've probably seen them on social media. They're called the Hebrew Israelite movement, okay? Or even referred to as like the Hebrew Roots movement. They preach something similar to what I'm going to share with you today. But in my opinion, they are just as extreme in their misinterpretation of scripture as replacement theology, right? Those who believe that the church, the modern church, has replaced the house of Israel. I think both of these camps have some truth to them, but both of them are way off in their conclusion. And I just want to draw a line because obviously when you make the claim that black people are descendants of the house of Israel, it's very easy to just kind of lump me into that category, right? Or you're just Hebrew roots movement. You're a Hebrew Israelite. No, I am not. I am for the truth, the unleavened truth, okay? Truth without the fluff, all right? And so I just want to kind of jump ahead of that so you guys understand where I'm coming from in my position, and then we can dive into the text. So it says here, Hebrew Israelites are groups of mostly African American individuals who believe they are the direct descendants of the ancient Israelites. Originating in the late 19th century, the movement combines Jewish and Christian traditions, often teaching that Black, Latino, and Native American peoples are the true chosen people. The movement is highly fragmented, ranging from peaceful groups to fringe sects known for radical, confrontational rhetoric. That's pretty accurate. If you've seen any of the videos of these guys, I'm not even going to put these guys on my platform. To me, they are just so far off base with the way they go about with their messaging. And in my opinion, I think it's intentional. And so you have these two opposing sides that both have a little bit of truth to them, right? The church has been grafted in to what we call Israel, okay? It's not just about bloodline descendants anymore because Messiah fulfilled that. And replacement theology uses 1948, the Balfour Declaration, the nation state of Israel. They use that as proof that all of the prophecies of Israel have been fulfilled. That is not true. That is not accurate. It's not biblically accurate, let alone historically. Okay. And then again, with the Hebrew Israelites, you have this camp who recognizes that Black people, Latinos, Native Americans are in fact bloodline descendants of the house of Israel, but they completely disregard those who have been grafted in. And so they have this all black mindset of what the house of Israel and what the kingdom looks like. And replacement theology has this church centric mindset of what the kingdom looks like. Both of them are wrong. But remember what I said in the first video, okay? I am anti lying, right? And the reason I'm so anti lying is because we know that the enemy's number one weapon against humanity is deception. I'm not bringing this up to claim some type of racial superiority. In fact, I'm going to prove the exact opposite because we know from Deuteronomy 28 that the house of Israel was cursed. And we have been living that curse for thousands of years. So, with that said, let's get into it. So, this is Deuteronomy 28, where Moses is speaking to the house of Israel before they enter the promised land. Remember, the covenant was never unconditional. This is probably the biggest misconception of God in general, is that He's unconditional. You can just do whatever you want. He's going to love you anyway. That is not true. And Moses highlights this. Okay. It's about obedience. So here we go. Starting at verse 1. Now, if you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God and are careful to follow all his commandments I'm giving you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings will come upon you and overtake you if you will obey the voice of the Lord your God. Now, Moses goes on in these next few verses, starting at verse 3. You'll be blessed in the city, blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed, as well as the produce of your land and the offspring of your livestock, the calves of your herds and the lambs of your flocks. So now we kind of have this understanding of what would have happened if Israel had been faithful. And as we know, through history, the Israelites have a huge problem staying faithful to the Most High, okay? Which is why Moses later goes on to describe the curses. And it's important to note that these curses are what we are going to use to identify who these lost tribes of Israel are, and why I firmly believe now from my research that, again, those that we label as black people are the ones being referred to here as the lost tribes of Israel. Verse 37, you will become an object of horror, scorn, and ridicule among all the nations to which the Lord will drive you. Verse 41, you will father sons and daughters, but they will not remain yours because they will go into captivity. The foreigner living among you will rise higher and higher above you, while you sink down lower and lower. He will lend to you, but you will not lend to him. He will be the head, and you will be the tail. Verse 48, you will serve your enemies. The Lord will send against you in famine, thirst, nakedness, and destitution. He will place an iron yoke on your neck until he has destroyed you. Verse 64, then the Lord will scatter you among all the nations, and from one end of the earth to the other, and there you will worship other gods, gods of wood and stone, which neither you nor your fathers have known. And again in verse 68, the Lord will return you to Egypt in ships by a route that I said you should never see again. There you will sell yourselves to your enemies as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you. Now, real quick, does this sound like a group of people who have racial superiority? No, this sounds like a nightmare. Whoever these people are about to go through it if they're disobedient to the Most High. So it blows my mind that the Hebrew Israelite movement can have so much arrogance, so much bass in their voice when they talk about being God's chosen people. Like, do you not remember what that entailed and how we got to where we are today? Now, again, if you know a little bit of history, just ask yourself, what group of people in human history checks all of these boxes? Stripped from the land, taken back to Egypt on ships, right? Having their children stripped from them, being the tail of every nation they're in instead of the head, being lent to instead of being the lender. Just think, who fits this description? I think it's pretty obvious. But in case you're on the fence, let me show you what this actually looks like. We're about to go through what that scattering across all the nations actually looked like in history. Now, for this, I'm actually going to call for some help. All right, there's a channel that I follow. He's probably my biggest mentor right now. His name is Ron, but his channel is called Truth Unedited. I highly recommend everyone go check his channel out. We talk about breaking down false doctrines within the body of believers, and this guy has been doing it for years. I have seen his channel go from 50, 60,000 subscribers to now almost 800,000. All right. The spirit is clearly moving with him. And I'm going to lean on him a little bit because he does some extensive work gathering all this information. And I think it's important. It was important for me. I had to see it, right? It's one thing for me to come out here and kind of explain things to you. But I think if you see it, it makes more sense. So let's start with the United States.
People who want to discredit our struggles here in America, they often want to say, well, every race of people have been slaves. But what these people don't seem to understand is what our plight and our condition has been after slavery was abolished. It's not just about slavery. Most people today know very little about Jim Crow. Let me show you.
Millions of freed African Americans exercised their right to vote after the Civil War. and they voted for black legislators who began to fill local and national offices. By the 1890s, Southern whites began to fear that blacks with political power would try to integrate Southern society.
White Southerners are resistant of the idea of living in an egalitarian society in which African Americans might operate as equal partners.
To keep blacks separate and powerless, Southern legislators passed what became known as Jim Crow laws. They were named after a song and dance routine called Jump Jim Crow that savagely mocked rural blacks and was performed by whites in blackface. The laws themselves were even harder on blacks.
They encode white supremacy through the enactment of segregation statutes, taking the vote away from African Americans, all sorts of things that are designed to subordinate black people, to establish a place for black people that they know, in a sense, to choreograph race relations.
Lawmakers could not violate the 15th Amendment, which prohibited states from denying anyone the right to vote because of race. So they devised obstacles that blacks could not overcome. States passed laws requiring voters to pay a tax or to prove that they own $500 worth of property. Other laws required people to pass literacy tests before they could cast a ballot.
In state after state, from 1890 to 1904, every state in the Deep South, the 11 original Confederate states, held state constitutions which functionally disenfranchised black males from the right to vote.
But the Southern states made sure there were loopholes in these new laws for whites. One, called the Grandfather Clause, allowed whites to bypass the poll tax and literacy tests. The law said if their grandfather had voted, then they could vote. At the time, no black in the South had a grandfather who had voted.
Let's continue. Let's move to South America.
Marching with friends and classmates, Lais Nacimiento is not only demanding better education and health care, she's also demanding equality.
Even though people say we have no racism in Brazil, it's not true. We are the majority of the population, but we don't have economic or political power.
Like most people in the state of Salvador, Lais is Afro-Brazilian. But unlike many of her fellow protesters, she didn't grow up in a middle-class family. She lives in a poor neighborhood on the outskirts of the city and is the first person in her family to ever go to university.
Brazil is one of the most socially unequal countries in the world. We're selling the image that everything is good and we'll host a World Cup, but it's a country that denies opportunity to its own people.
Brazil has the biggest black population of any country outside Nigeria. Colonized by the Portuguese, over 10 million African slaves were sent here.
Salvador was the capital of the slave trade in Brazil, and Brazil was the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery. Now, despite the fact that over 80% of the population here considers itself to be Afro-Brazilian, the city of Salvador has yet to elect a black mayor.
Although Afro-Brazilian culture is celebrated throughout the country and internationally, statistically, blacks here suffer the worst when it comes to access to education, healthcare, and high-paying jobs. Even with such inequalities, Professor Fabio Lima says fewer blacks than whites are going to the protests.
Now, when you look at many of these people, there is something that I should highlight. When you think of Brazilians or Colombians, you do not think of the Afro-Brazilians or the Afro-Colombians, but a definitive look. People that look like Sofia Vergara. The media and television does a very good job of keeping us with a false mental idea of the world that's far from accurate. It should be noted that the culture in South America is very different than in North America because they encouraged intermingling. In America, they were against intermingling for a long time, as this woman said in the 60s.
And evidently he feels that they will be accepted socially. And I don't feel that they ever will be. But the whole trouble with this integration business is that in the end, it probably will end up with mixing socially. And you will have, well, I think their aim is mixed marriages and becoming equal with the whites.
And this is why we have such a different look than many of them in South America. The Portuguese in South America were different than the Irish and Dutch settlers in the United States. The Portuguese encouraged intermingling, which is why the population of Brazil, they look so different. This is also why they have such a high population of what they call black people. They mix in a great deal with the Portuguese settlers that were there and were called mulattoes. So their black population is a mixture of those who are pure Hebrew, not intermingled, and others, which is the majority, that are intermingled with the Portuguese. And that's why their look became different.
Again, when we think about slavery, a lot of times we just think about America, okay? But just in Brazil alone, there were 10 million slaves brought to Brazil. And it's interesting to note the financial disparity. Afro-Brazilians make significantly less money than their white counterparts in the land. In Colombia, the Afro-Colombians have a 30% poverty rate, and they face double the amount of armed conflict as their white counterparts. Sound familiar? In Argentina, the government literally shipped in hundreds of thousands of whites to reduce the population of blacks in the country. In 1778, 37% of the Argentinian population was black. Do you know what that percentage is today? Less than 1%. Again, this is systematic oppression, systematic erasing of a culture, and it's not just happening in the US. Now, here's something fascinating that I want you guys to see. Check this out.
This brother put this on Instagram. This was 3 Negro men walking through Havana, Cuba. One was Cuban, one was Colombian, and one was from the United States. The brother talking was the one from the United States. He was from the Bronx. He said the people were so confused because they literally could have come from any country. They all looked similar, except that they were from 3 different places, 3 different countries. If you saw them walking together, they would look related. You might have thought that they were all related until they spoke and they all had different languages. You see, none of them know who they were outside of where their families were dropped off to. These men did not actually know each other. That's what I'm trying to illustrate. This is the scattering.
So you got one guy from the Bronx, one guy from Colombia, one guy from Cuba. 3 different countries, 3 different languages, but if you just looked at them, you would not be able to tell them apart. It's not until they speak that you can tell they're from different places. They can't tell you what tribe they come from. They can't tell you where their ancestors belong to, right? But we can obviously see that they are what we would call black people, okay? This is the scattering across all the nations. And this verse, Deuteronomy 28:68, to me is the nail in the coffin, right? Being sent back to Egypt in ships. Key word here, ships, okay? The Babylonian captivity didn't involve ships. The house of Israel walked to Babylon. This verse is clearly describing a different type of captivity, a type of captivity that we don't see in the Old or New Testament, which to me clearly indicates a future captivity. And it says you will offer yourselves up as male and female slaves. Sound familiar? If we just look at this map of the slave trade from Africa to the Americas across 210 years, all right, you can clearly see the ships left the west coast of Africa, and where did they land? They landed in the Caribbean, in Barbados, Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, all of these islands scattered across the Caribbean. During this time period, 600,000 African slaves were sent to Barbados alone, just Barbados. And we know here in America, when slavery was abolished, it didn't mean that black people were suddenly just equal, right? Now they had to put it into law ways to continue to suppress and oppress the black communities. So what do these people all have in common, right? Their identity was stripped from them, okay? When you were sold as a slave, your name was taken off the auction block. You were given a new name. Your heritage is completely done away with. And Deuteronomy 28, verse 37 highlights this. You will be a byword amongst the peoples. We became a people defined by captivity instead of being defined by the covenant. And this is happening even in Africa to this day. Deuteronomy 28, verse 48, he will put an iron yoke around your neck until he has destroyed you. This didn't just apply to those that were shipped off to other countries and other continents. In 1913, you had the Native Lands Act. Okay, this pushed thousands of black people to the outskirts of these cities. You have the apartheid, which wrote oppression into the law, and it stayed that way for decades. And one of the least taught genocides in human history happened in the Congo.
After the Conference of Berlin in 1885, Europeans embarked on a continent-wide land grab. In less than 20 years, 90% of African territory would be placed under European colonial rule. One of the main beneficiaries was King Leopold II of Belgium. Aware of the vast fortune to be made, he persuaded Europe's powers to recognize his sovereignty over one of Africa's largest regions, the Congo.
Here was this man who became King of Belgium in 1865 at the age of 30. Enormously shrewd, enormously greedy, enormously ambitious, and with an absolutely brilliant sense of public relations. He hired the explorer Henry Morton Stanley, the man who found Livingstone, to go to the Congo and essentially stake out this huge territory for him. Leopold got first the United States and then all the major nations of Western Europe to ratify his seizure of this enormous territory in the center of the continent.
First, Leopold created a smokescreen, claiming that he wished to educate a savage people.
They were all really fooled by Leopold because they took him at his word. They thought he was a man who's going to lose all his money in this crazy philanthropic venture. But they didn't realize what he was really after at all, which was to make himself hugely rich by exploiting brown hands and broad backs who were going to carry the wealth of Africa and load it on ships for his own personal profit.
Bring them! Extreme violence was employed to impose Leopold's dominion. The right hands of those who failed to meet rubber quotas were severed. Even young children were not spared.
In village after village, the army would seize the women of the village and hold them hostage in order to force the men of each village to go into the forest and gather a monthly quota of wild rubber. And they did this for about 20 years. And you can just very easily imagine if you have a village where the women are all being held hostage, the men are all in the forest as forced laborers for several weeks out of each month. There's nobody to plant and harvest food, to go hunting, to go fishing, to do all the normal things through which a community feeds itself. So from all of these causes, starvation, being worked to death, and most of all from the disease that hit this famine-ridden population, the best estimates are that between 1880, when King Leopold first got his hands on the Congo, and 1920, that in that 40-year period, the population was slashed from about 20 million at the beginning of that period to around 10 million at the end. So an enormous loss of human life.
And this really highlights the deception, because you have the true tribes of Israel suffering all across the world, while the Rothschilds are ushering in a nation state for people who have no ties, bloodline or religiously, to the covenant whatsoever. And again, this didn't just happen in the West. There are thousands and thousands of black people in Asia.
This woman is Indian, but she wants to go back to Africa because she knows this is where her heritage is. She knows this because she looks just like us. She knows she doesn't share heritage with the people of India, and she wants to go back to Africa. But go back where? Africa is a continent. You see, she doesn't know who she is. This is what he prophesied would be. If you don't understand that he said this would happen, you are not looking at the world properly. He prophesied, I will scatter them as with an east wind before the enemy. I will show them the back and not the face in the day of their calamity. Jeremiah chapter 18, verse 7. He also said, and Yahuwah will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where Yahuwah will drive you. And there you will serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 27 and 28. What you should understand is that I'm giving you evidence of the validity of the scriptures. This is very real stuff. All these people are labeled Afro, whatever, and they are marginalized and not given proper place in society. They believe it's because of the color of their skin, just like we do. But that is a satanic lie, so that the people of the world do not truly worship Yahuwah in spirit and in truth. But the time for these lies, they're over. It's done.
So this woman is born in India. She has an Indian dialect, but if you just look at her, she looks like a black woman. And then there's Europe, okay? Germany, France, Belgium, the UK, the same oppression, the same lost language, the same lost heritage.
Yes, I think it's important to understand that race as a construct really comes into being during the 18th century. For a long time, the words nation, people, gens in French were used to describe different kinds of people. And then ultimately, the word race was being used. And this is a move from, for example, the term variety, which is a botanical metaphor, to a natural metaphor, and to a zoological metaphor. And it's an idea that humans are being subjected to the same methods that animals were being subjected to. For a long time, humans were not classified. And some people are explaining the idea of blackness as a result of a degeneration from an original white prototype. Other people are looking into the interior of bodies, interior of black bodies. There's even somebody who was an anatomist on a plantation in Guyana And he said that there was an internal blackness. And this means that blackness and the idea of race is moving from the outside of the body to the inside of the body.
And do you see that? This is why we look at race in the way that we do. It has been indoctrinated for centuries and is just a way of thought. They basically were teaching that our black skin was a curse, talking about falling from God's grace while not attaching to anything he has actually said, because we did fall from grace. We were cursed, but our curse wasn't black skin. The curses that he speaks of are directly in the scriptures.
And so for me, I believe that the enemy has been using the label of race to hide this fact. We have all been just identified as black, right? Because they don't want us to trace our true heritage, whether we're Afro-Colombians, whether we're Afro-Brazilians, whether we're Afro-Americans. The Afro distinction is the proof in the pudding, right? That Afro distinction means you're not from here, okay? You're from somewhere else, Africa, and you were brought here because the Father prophesied he would strip us of our heritage, and that's exactly what he did because we were disobedient. This is not a racial argument, okay? This is disobedience and prophecy playing out right in front of our eyes. Now, remember what I said in the beginning of the video, okay? The covenant with the Most High is both about bloodline and about obedience, okay? And the reason we know that to be true is because there are prophecies for the house of Israel that have yet to be fulfilled, specifically the dry bones prophecy in Ezekiel. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Look, they are saying, our bones are dried up and our hope has perished. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and tell them that this is what the Lord God says. O my people, I will open your graves and bring you up from them, and I will bring you back to the land of Israel. If we scroll down here to verse 21 and 22, you are to tell them that this is what the Lord God says. I will take the Israelites out of the nations to which they have gone, and I will gather them from all around and bring them to their own land. I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel, and one king will rule over them. Then they will no longer be two nations and will never again be divided into two kingdoms. Now, we already established in part 2 that this has not happened yet. 1948 was not the return of the tribes to the land of Israel, okay? Even the people living there are proof of this because they all call themselves Jews. Where's the tribe of Reuben? Where's the tribe of Levi? Where's the tribe of Issachar, Manasseh, Ephraim? These other tribes aren't even mentioned. So by their own admission, in a way, this prophecy has not been fulfilled because the people living there only refers to themselves as Jews. And Yahuwah clearly identifies the dry bones as Israel. These people were hopeless at this point. They felt that they had no hope. They were out of covenant. They would never be restored back to the land. And Yah was prophesying to them through Ezekiel that, no, I will restore you. I will bring the dry bones up out of their graves. I will bring you back to the land, and you will no longer be a divided kingdom. And I want to highlight Romans 11 here because so many people in the replacement theology camp love to quote Paul, and they take him completely out of context most times. But if we just read verses 1 and 2 here, I ask then, did God reject his people? Certainly not. I am an Israelite myself, a descendant of Abraham, from the tribe of Benjamin. God did not reject his people, whom he foreknew. Do you not know what the scripture says about Elijah, how he appealed to God against Israel? So here we have Paul, one, making the distinction that he is a physical Israelite, okay? So he himself is not negating his own heritage, his own bloodline, right? He also identifies himself as from the tribe of Benjamin. So not only is he showing himself as an Israelite, but he's showing he's not a Jew. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. And he is making the case that Yah has not forgotten his people. He has not abandoned his physical covenant with the people of Israel. And so when we think about the olive tree, right, and those who have been grafted into the tree based on belief and obedience to the Most High, okay, that doesn't mean that the natural branches, Israel, have been cut off. We have Israel and the Gentiles, both grafted into the covenant by belief in Messiah. And so you have the replacement theology camp arguing that the modern church has replaced Israel, but Ezekiel was written after exile. Ezekiel is speaking of a future gathering of the physical Israel. And as you can tell from this moment, the regathering of Israel hadn't happened yet, which is why the counterfeit Israel occupying the land right now, why exposing them is so important. Because if we allow them to hijack the covenant, we're going to miss on the true prophecies that Yah has yet to fulfill. And it's interesting because not only Romans 11, Romans 9, 10, and 11, Paul is going into detail about physical Israel. Why would he do this if the church has already replaced physical Israel? So I'm throwing a lot at you. Let's just go ahead and bring it all back together, okay? Let's just go through the list here. Were the people of the transatlantic slave trade removed from their land? Yes. Okay. Were they loaded onto ships? Yes. Were they sold into slavery? Yes. Were they scattered among the nations? Yes. Were their children taken from the parents? Yes. Was their language stripped? Yes. We know their language and their names were stripped. Was their religion replaced? Yes. Was there an iron yoke placed around their necks, generation after generation? Yes. We've seen that all across the world, just in the United States alone, with Jim Crow, 13th Amendment, systematic poverty, mass incarceration, and last but not least, was their heritage stripped entirely? Yes. Black people are the only people in the world that are identified by their skin color and by a continent. Do we think that's a coincidence? I think not. Again, this is not about racial supremacy or superiority. This is not about politics. This is about seeing the fingerprint of the scripture and identifying who those people are that the scripture is referring to. And I feel that I've made the case pretty obvious here that these lost tribes of Israel, the scattered tribes all across the world, are what we call black people. And I told you guys, this is very personal for me. Okay. When Messiah says, I came only for the lost sheep of Israel, he was talking to people who look like me, right? When I look at black culture in America, okay, and I've said this numerous times, and I get a lot of pushback from black people, and it is what it is. But we are perpetuating these curses on our own people in America, specifically with gun violence. Okay, our entire culture, specifically in rap music, is built on promoting and condoning gun violence. We are self-sabotaging and self-genociding our own people. And I think if we realized who we really were, imagine the power of millions of black people who come to the understanding that their heritage is to the tribes of Israel. They were a chosen people from the Most High. The Messiah comes from our bloodline. Think about how powerful that is. That means a lot to me for a guy who grew up not knowing his heritage. Where do my ancestors come from? Right? It took me doing an ancestry test to figure out my people are from the Igbo tribe. The Igbo tribe to this day identifies as one of the tribes of Israel. So yeah, I do have personal ties here. But again, it's about the truth. And being connected to the covenant through bloodline doesn't make me special. If anything, there's more of an emphasis to be a follower of Messiah, to be obedient to the commandments. Because this heritage, the Hebrew heritage, is where we come from. And if this makes some of y'all uncomfortable, I get it. I'm uncomfortable. I'm sweating, okay? In my own house. All right? I'm not comfortable with the ramifications of this information, but it's the truth. And the truth is all that matters here. So let's tie it all together, right? Let's bring these 3 videos back to one conclusion, okay? We have Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews. We made the distinction of which is which, okay? We've identified the people in the land today are not Jews. They are not bloodline descendants, and they are not in covenant with Most High. They're just not, all right? And now we can readily see who those actual tribes, who those actual lost sheep are. And they are the people that we call black people all across the world, scattered across all the nations. And what I need to hit home, what I need everyone who watches this to understand is that Yahuwah is not done with you. He's not done with me, okay? The tribes will be restored. We will be brought back to the land by the hand of the Most High, not by the hand of Lord Rothschild. The true regathering of our people is coming. Yah has not forgotten about us. He will restore us, but it's up to us to be obedient, to follow his commandments. And I hope and I pray that the Spirit is waking some of you up, the dry bones. I hope that he's tugging on your heart the same way he was tugging on mine, okay? Understanding where we come from, understanding our heritage, understanding, just like it says in John 10, the sheep hear my voice. They know me. Okay? Do you hear his voice? Do you know him? And if not, maybe this video points you in the right direction. So that's what I got for y'all. Okay? We have finished part 3 of our first pillar of our reset series, identifying God's chosen people. And I'm hoping that this is just one pillar that we can use to reset that foundation on this topic. And we're going to keep diving into these next pillars and keep kind of restoring our foundation, right? Rebuilding our foundation of faith, removing the leaven, removing the false doctrine from the church, from the body, and just getting back to what the word says. Okay? No more doctrines of men. So let me know what y'all think. I know this is a lot for this video, a lot for this series, but I want to hear from y'all in the comments. Okay? Let me know what resonated with you. Again, if you think I'm right, if you think I'm wrong, if you're in the middle, let's talk about it. All right? Don't be afraid to have discourse. Okay? If you guys have seen in the comments, I'm not the kind of person to just like lash at people or, oh, you're dumb for thinking this. Like that's not me, right? Let's talk about it. Okay. That's what this community is built on, is fostering these conversations and carrying those conversations forward. All right. So let me know what y'all think. Make sure y'all like and subscribe. If this video brings value to you, I'll see you on the next one.